What is up, everybody? I hope you are doing well. I hope you're caught up with assignments. I hope that you're helping out around the house, not playing too many video games. So today's assignment, or actually today's video, is a review of assignment 11 about Nat Turner, this guy here, okay? So I'm going to quickly go through the video questions, and then I really want to talk about a couple answers from the debrief question that I thought were pretty powerful from your classmates. So to get us started, we're going to look at video 1 very quickly. Video 1, question 1, what role did religion play? Nat Turner, well, actually we'll kind of go over it in a little bit with the questions, but he was a preacher. He preached to people. He often said he had these visions in the sky, and that he escaped from slavery, and then he said that God told him to return, that he has more work to do. And then finally he had this vision that he had to rebel rebel from slavery. So question 2, why did Nat Turner find the violence of his rebellion justified? He basically thought that, violence was necessary in order to awaken abolitionists in the North and actually just try to truly make change. He was like, all right, I'm hearing all the people giving speeches, I'm hearing all of these things, it's time to physically, it's not working, we got to do something else more radical. And so that's why he thought it was okay to rebel this violently. And the rebellion, you saw what it was like in the videos and in video 2. They went house to house, breaking into these people's homes and killing all of the white people that they were able to find. They killed over 60 white people, slave owners included, and children and women included as well. It was brutal, this rebellion. Question 3, what happened to the rebellion? It was crushed after 2 days. And then these slaves, including Nat Turner, were tried and convicted of murder and sentenced either to, and some of the, Nat Turner, we talk about his death in a little bit, but some of the other slaves were killed and hanged, as well as Nat Turner, and then some were also sent to different places, stuck in slavery. So after all of that, some of these rebels were actually sent back to slavery away from their families. Question 4, what was the impact of the rebellion on other slaves in the institution of slavery? This is probably the biggest thing that comes about in a result of Nat Turner's rebellion. White slave owners were frightened by this experience, and what they did is 200 slaves were kind of killed in revenge because of Nat Turner's rebellion, which is the crazy part. Like an eye for an eye type of logic, according to white slave owners. And these were slaves that were not associated with the rebellion. They were just slaves in other parts of the country that were killed because of what Nat Turner did. And then the other thing is laws and restrictions were also increased on slaves. So there was harsher penalties for white people who were helping slaves. There was harsher penalties and restrictions for slaves themselves. Everything basically got more control by slave owners. They just took more control. Video 2, question 1, describe Nat Turner's rebellion. We went over that, the house-to-house murder of whites and white slave owners. And question 2, connected to video 1, according to Nat Turner, who told him to lead this rebellion? God! He said God told him to do it. And then question 3 for video 2 says, why did he lead this rebellion? Not only did God tell him, but also he felt that he was just tired of the physical and psychological pain and fear of slavery, that it kind of was a breaking point in many ways. Slaves were kind of pushed so far that Nat Turner got pushed so far, and he just snapped, and this was the violent reaction. And the violent outburst to try and show how painful slavery was. Moving on quickly to video 3. This is where it gets even worse. So after question 1 says, what did the white slave owners do to Nat Turner after they captured him? They put him on trial. they publicly hanged him, which was lynching, called lynching, which carried on into the 1900s, um, which you'll learn about in 11th, or actually next year. They decapitated him. They hanged him. They cut his head off, and then there's rumors that they actually removed the skin from his body and cut the arms off of Nat Turner, in this public execution of him. And I think one of the reasons why they did that, why the white people did that, was because, one, they had their own fear, that was embodied. Like, all of their fear was realized because of Nat Turner's rebellion. They feared that slaves would rise up and rebel. Remember, the slave population outnumbered the white population in the South. So if slaves rebelled, they were going to do. They, according to white slave owners, feared that they would be killed by the slaves. And so I think Nat Turner kind of became this 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 person to make an example of what would happen if you rebel. So they brutally killed him, to try and make slaves fearful of rebelling, but I think they also brutally killed him because they were afraid of what they were losing, or what they could possibly lose. So, yeah. The think about it questions, the return of the think about it question. I think in the North, abolitionists may have some of them may have felt inspired by the rebellion. I think some of them may have been, I wonder if some thought maybe it was a little too far. It was a little too radical, a little too violent for some of them. I mean, remember, a lot of the abolitionists at the time, were, they were, like, not most popular in the North. So I think some of them kind of were like, yeah, we need to get more violent. And then I think some were like, whoa, we don't want to have that message. And then Southerners, I think, really felt, the last video talked about it, but this fear of losing the institution of slavery. Slavery was, like, becoming less and less popular in the entire world, and it was kind of preserved in this southern United States bubble. And so they knew that slavery was kind of losing its power, so they were afraid of losing more of their power. They were afraid of this violent uprising. So just think of those things. And now the debrief question, looking at Frederick Douglass and Nat Turner, kind of comparing who was the most effective. Just quickly, some new voices. Lewis, what's up, Lewis, buddy? Lewis says that, quote, I would believe that Frederick Douglass's methods were far more effective because his works lasted longer and reflected upon the people in a better way. Turner's method was simply viewed as an attack and was quickly crushed. His narrative was altered and changed by the enemy. Douglass effectively wrote his own narrative and lived to fight against alteration. Lewis, that's awesome. What Lewis is trying to say is basically Frederick Douglass had a more long-lasting impact. Also because he physically survived longer than Nat Turner. Nat Turner was my age, essentially, when he led this rebellion. And Nat Turner was my age. Frederick Douglass, painted by him learning how to read and write, and by him appealing to the emotions of white people, Frederick Douglass proved that slaves were human and not violent. Nat Turner's legacy, because he died earlier, Nat Turner's story could be altered and changed by white people to make things more fearful. Frederick Douglass was able to constantly prove his story, prove what he was doing. A couple other points that I thought were really impactful. Kishalani says that I think Frederick and Nat both made an impact, but I believe Frederick did it in a right way, and that Nat made a greater impact. Kishalani says, I say this because Frederick Douglass chose a path that gave slaves a platform. He was one to speak for them and tell their stories on how they felt about all of these cruel actions. Nat took a path of violence that showed slaves to not let others let you treat you this way. It chose to stick up for yourself and your rights as a human being. He showed that slaves could be just as powerful as white Americans, which is a really cool interpretation. This was basically this cool, like Frederick Douglass, you show that there's the writing and the reading and the appeal to emotions, but Nat Turner also says, look, you can stand up and fight for yourself. And I think that um, is a powerful interpretation of Nat Turner. Um, Karina says, quote, when it comes to Nat Turner, I believe that he had the right mindset. By mindset, I specifically mean him wanting to punish the people who caused or had something to do with slavery. The only thing I disagree with is the way he went about it. This means I don't agree with him killing others, because that just puts him at the level that whites were at. I believe that Frederick Douglass had a large impact. Although he was quiet, he still learned and found a way to spread his story. Slavery was a negative thing to Frederick, um, or negative thing, but Frederick instead wrote a book, preached, and found a way to turn a positive into a negative, or a negative into a positive. Maybe the flipped point there, but so Karina kind of disagrees with the violence of Nat Turner, um, uh, but kind of understands it's kind of like justified usually. Let's see. There was one other thing I kind of wanted to talk about. Lena makes a comeback. What's up, Lena? She goes, I think Frederick Douglass and Nat Turner were both great in different ways. I think that Frederick Douglass's method was much more effective. Frederick Douglass escaped slavery and then proceeded to educate others and become a leader for many people. I think seeing someone as successful as Frederick Douglass gave many African Americans hope for what an African American can really achieve. Frederick changed the views of many others on slavery and did it in a nonviolent way. I think Turner's way was less effective because he killed many innocent children who might have not known about slavery. Nat Turner was tired of the ways of slavery, but I don't think he knew the consequences that might have happened, because after many harsher laws and rights were taken away from slaves. Lena, that's a really good thing to note about the impact. Frederick Douglass's actions didn't cause such a violent restriction by white Americans and white slave owners specifically. Nat Turner, because he was so violent, caused for a violent reaction by white slave owners. Not only did white slave owners kill 200 slaves in other parts of the country, but they created laws that made things more restricted for slaves in America. So those are some great ideas. Chris, I had yours. Joshua, I had yours. And Sanaya had yours. I'm sorry I couldn't get to it. But good job kind of getting like deep into this comparison between Frederick Douglass and Nat Turner. Yeah, I hope everyone's staying healthy and staying safe, and look forward to a little Sosa talk on assignment 12 next. Be good.